everyone. Welcome to Briar Haus Writes. I'm Becky Parker, and today it is my honor to be able to talk to acclaimed poet and writer and the current poet laureate for the state of Nebraska, Mr. Matt Mason. Matt, welcome to our program.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Matt, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I am as mentioned, I'm the state poet of Nebraska, which I've been since 2019, and it goes till the end of 2024. My goal as state poet has been to get to every county in Nebraska, and we've got 93 counties. I just finished that in mid-October. But I've been writing since high school, even though I didn't know how much I liked poetry in my classes, but I knew that I connected with poetry as a way to just process the world around me, process my own emotions, and kept going after high school. And I've published 5 books. I've done work for the State Department in other countries. I've just uh, I love what poetry brings to my life, but even if I wasn't being published or anything like that, I would still write because it just helps the world make more sense to me.
Well, and you mentioned that you worked with state governments to, promote poetry in other countries. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because it's my
Yeah,
understanding you've been in many countries. So why is that
yeah.
important?
I think it's a great way of diplomacy. So I've worked for the State Department in Belarus, Botswana, Nepal, and Romania. All programs working for a couple weeks with young adults primarily who are learning English. But every culture has poetry as part of the culture, and
Hmm.
it's great to go into these countries and reach out and compare how we both kind of handle poetry in our countries. It's amazing to be the first country was Belarus, which this was 2008, so a bit ago, but it was a time where the U.S. Embassy had a lot of conflicts with the Belarusian government. And so an embassy that's supposed to be staffed by like 35 people was down to 6 because the rest had been kicked out of the country by the Belarusians. Um, and this was a time where they had permission to do a program for the first time, a public program, and they were looking at a poetry program, and they liked the proposal I put in. Um, and when I went there, it was amazing. 'Cause there are, 40-foot tall statues to poets, parks named for poets, museums for poets, all in Minsk. It ended up being a great way to connect to people because, poetry is at least given lip service. I don't think Lukashenko there, who's pretty much a dictator, really likes poetry but it is an indelible part of the culture.
Well, and I think I read where when you go to these countries, you're fostering change using creative writing. So
Yes.
what kind of change do you hope? Like what kind of legacy do you want that you have left in these countries?
I just, in a place like Belarus, it's tough because, again, 2008, and I worked with a lot of young adults who were speaking their minds, who are talking about society, and I hope they're not in prison. I hope
Mm,
they are
yeah.
still writing and getting their work out to people because it was powerful to hear. And then in Botswana, part of our uh, part of our emphasis was to teach organizing and running readings and also AIDS awareness. So I hope that the messages we were working with, getting out the words about AIDS awareness are still there, as well as I hope I know some of the folks we worked with took some of the tools we left with running poetry events and all are still going. And in Nepal, I know it's still going strong. After we left, I was there with 2 other poets. They started a group called Word Warriors, and they were traveling the country, really working with people in cities and villages around Nepal after we left, doing, performance poetry and written poetry and all kinds of things it was just amazing to see happen.
And in Nebraska, you have been very influential, and it sounds like you have a big love for kids from all your different things. So tell me about the Nebraska Pen Pal program. That sounds very intriguing.
Yeah, this was started. I had a fellowship from the Academy of American Poets and the Mellon Foundation to bring poetry, myself and a few other poets, to different parts of the state, concentrating on western Nebraska, which is pretty rural. So I did three different tours, each with two other poets. It was great to go with, Zadika Poindexter and Joe from Long Island and Ryan Boyland and Emily Anderson and Colleen O'Doherty and Fernando Montejano, all to these, each one was, a 3 day run through different parts of the state, and it was a blast. It's just so fun to be there with other poets, first of all.
Mhm.
But we're working in high schools and junior highs primarily, some colleges, community centers. We did one elementary school, which the poets with me were a little nervous about because they didn't have poems for elementary kids, but we did fine. So, and it's fun to bring different voices to different parts of the state, and also just show them that poetry has energy, poetry has life to it. Poetry, can be read and it doesn't need a translator for you. It was so much fun.
Do you ever remember the first time poetry came alive for you?
I don't know if I would call it the first time, but one of the most influential for me was I was living for a year in Des Moines, Iowa, working in a volunteer program, and they had a new poetry festival, and one of the poets was Galway Cannell, fantastic poet from Vermont. But I had left college, graduated, and but wanted to study poetry on my own because I learned to love it in college. But I was having, I was struggling with it because, I would go to a library, go to a bookstore, look at the books on the shelves and go, oh, this won a big award. I will read it, and learn from it. And, 9 times out of 10, I would pull this award-winning book off and it's like, I don't connect with this. I don't feel anything from this. So I was struggling, wondering if what I wrote was poetry, if what I loved was actual poetry. But then there's this poetry festival in town, and this, the poet laureate of Vermont, a Pulitzer Prize winner. So I figured I would hate him. And instead, I go and, Cannell starts reading poems. I'm like, okay, I like this. And then, but there was a moment where he read at the time it was a new poem called Oatmeal. It riveted me. It is a weird poem. It's about how, yeah, I think he's like at a writer's colony, and he's been told that eating oatmeal when you're by yourself is bad for mental health, because it's such a clumpy thing. And so he is eating oatmeal with an imaginary companion, and he chooses John Keats, a poet who's been dead for 200 years, one of my favorite poets, though. And so this poem is just weird. It's bizarre. It's got all these inside jokes about John Keats. It's got a nice dig on Wordsworth at one point. I mean, it is suddenly I'm seeing this award-winning poet with a poem that I really wish I had written. And I could see myself writing something like. And so suddenly it all kind of connects. It's like what I am doing at this point is poetry. What I am writing is poetry. And I'm walking out after the reading, and just by the flow of crowds, I end up right next to Galway Kinnell himself as we're walking out. And I'm like, all I could say was, I really love that oatmeal poem. Um, I'm just a kid. And then awkward silence. And he's just very wonderfully started a conversation with me, asked about myself and all. We go to sign books and everybody's, I couldn't afford a book. So I just have the program, but everybody else has a book and I feel terrible. I'm like, I apologize and explain my whole story to him, and he just looks at me and is like, "What's your name?" And I go, "It's Matt." And he pulled one of the books he'd read from that night, autographed it, and gave it to me. And
Oh,
at that in the next 2 months, I wrote, some of the best poems I've written in my life. They're all the poems I used to get into graduate school. And it really changed my writing life right there. With just, this wonderful poem by a great poet and just by his kindness afterward, too.
when you are writing, Matt, what are some challenges that you face, and how do you
Uh,
overcome them?
I think part of one of the challenges of writing is just ego, and overcoming that is by, you know, set yourself a schedule and keep it, no matter what. It might mean you're writing trash, but every writer writes trash, and at some point you have to accept that and just, not show another human being what you've written. But write it, because even if you're writing trash, you're trying something, you're experimenting, and you learn by it. So trash is great. Write all the trash you possibly can because it helps you learn things. And it's just kind of getting to that kind of attitude that that I think I needed to do as a writer so that I could, keep being experimental and keep writing.
Does it take the pressure off when you don't feel like you have to be a performer writer, that you can just be
Yes.
yourself when you write?
Oh, yes. It really helps me to, um, you know, keep something authentic happening. And I think that's key to me. When I first started writing, I was, as a teenager, started writing poems. And at some point, I had like 30 poems I'd written. It's like, ooh, and no one will see those because they are not great. But they are great to me because they're time capsules of what I was feeling at the time.
Hmm.
But in looking at those 30 poems, there were a couple of them that stood out to me as being inauthentic, as being over dramatic about the emotions I was trying to process. And those are the only two poems I've thrown away that I haven't kept, because I think it for me it was necessary that what I write be true. And those poems were not truthful. They were just kind of, I don't know, self-pitying or whatever, but not, you can be self-pitying and still be authentic. Those were not. So and I think that's carried through, and I think it's important to me. And by lowering my worry about whether it's good or bad, it lets me still do that. Again, if it's a poem that's not working, I'm not going to show it to other people, but I'm happy to write it because I'll keep it. It is still a time capsule for me of something that happened to me in this week of 2024, that I was trying to figure out.
Did you ever show your work to your wife, who is also an acclaimed poet?
Yes. My wife is Sarah McKinstry Brown. She's an incredible writer. She's a better writer than me. And yeah, at first, as we were dating before we were married, trying to kind of figure out and how can we help each other. But it turns out we write so very differently. For Sarah, she needs silence and control of her environment when she writes a first draft. I can write a first draft in a McDonald's. And so, um, there's points in our processes where we can help each other, and there are points in our processes where we annoy each other.
Well,
We
speaking
are,
of that, my
yeah, oh,
I have a listener who found out that I was going to be interviewing you, and also he wanted to know when you and your wife, who are both acclaimed poets, argue, do you argue in haiku?
no. We do not. No, that would that would probably be better because it requires you to pay attention much more closely to what you're saying. So, yeah, there are
Do you
less
write
regrets in
love sonnets
haiku.
to each other? Do you
We
write
do
a
write.
poet a day to each other to declare your love? How does that work? So,
We do not. We do write a fair amount, poems for each other or about each other, though. Not necessarily on a regular basis. I think our like our anniversary a year ago. Sometimes it's more meaningful to find poems by other people that kind of sum up our feelings too. So, I'll share those with her also. So.
what do you think is the secret to a long and happy marriage?
I think the secret to a long and happy marriage is finding ways to communicate and always working on communication. I think our communication styles are very different, and so we frustrate each other a lot, but we don't stop working. We don't stop trying to understand each other, where each other is coming from, and that has been, huge for us.
Matt, tell us about what you would like for your legacy as a poet and a writer to be remembered. When people read your work, they're 300 years from now, what do you want them to know?
Yeah, what I really want people to get from my work is that poetry it is a serious art form. It is also enjoyable. It is entertaining. It is, interesting. It is relevant to their lives. That's my hope. I think we've spent much of the last 100 years where poetry needed to be translated through some kind of gatekeeper, a critic, an academic,
Hmm.
to be understood. And those poems are wonderful, but there's a pretty small audience who actually gets enjoyment from Ezra Pound's The Cantos. I think we need poem. My hope is that my work gives license to younger poets who grow into older poets, so that they can see, kind of like I saw with Galway Kinnell, that what he wrote was something I wanted to write or I
Hmm.
could write, that what I'm writing is poetry. And I want to kind of hopefully give more young poets that kind of permission to just do weird things, try things out. It doesn't have to be, some very complicated puzzle of words. It can be, of course, but it doesn't
Hmm.
have to be. It can be a simple story. It can be, some weird, bizarre joke. And if you do it right, it's a poem.
Right. Well, Matt, speaking of your work, would you read for us today?
Yeah, I wanted to read a couple newer poems, and then one or two older poems, or not too old. This poem, I've just been editing poems the past few days, and I wrote these over, I'm still catching up, typing things. So this poem is called "Embracing the Day: Song for the Morning." In the morning, we break open. We sway like tall trees. We are the black squirrel, fat with winter fur. We are the smaller deer with white tail down, still curious, not learned to fear. Oh, hail this shit show. All praise to the mistake. This day we have not lived yet, this gift we have yet to break. This poem's called "My Teenage Daughter is Studying in Japan." My 16-year-old daughter was just on a Rotary exchange and just got back a few months ago. So my teenage daughter is studying in Japan. She sends photos of breathtaking landscapes, breathtaking cityscapes, Osaka's runner mural, Hokkaido's hills. Today, it's a menu snapshot, a tray, French fries, colored splotches, blue, white, yellow, a painting titled Blueberry Jesus Fries. No, a painting whose title has been translated to Blueberry Jesus Fries because these languages are nothing adjacent, are opposite sides of this planet, are oceans, are 15 hours into a future where you can walk into a Burger Lion, order yourself Blueberry Jesus Fries, go on with your day. My teenage daughter is caught on a different part than I am. She most doubts the blueberry on French fries part. And I want to know where the Jesus comes in. Does he save or flip tables? Is this an elevation of transubstantiation or just another missing accent? I'm happy not knowing. There are mysteries in this world. There are questions unanswerable. There are answers unsatisfying. I want to buy a tray swirling with salt, oil, the essence of galaxies, and the spirit on duty who shapes them. I want to set it before you with a candle on top and treat you, make a wish, and wrap the flame with your breath. Take this and eat. So you might know evil, good, blueberry syrup, Jesus, gut flummox, hallelujah, amen. This poem is from my book Rock Stars, came out a little over a year ago from Button Poetry. This is the first poem of the book. It's called Rapture. Is the best song by Blondie. It makes you feel like there's no other choice but to raise your arms up and shake your feet. Even the Man from Mars, Eating Cars, disco rap, weird bits, all of it. Debbie Harry's voice swoons to a command, the piper playing to the wicker basket of cobras, and inhibitions be damned. Though, when you hear it in a Chipotle in your 40s, seated across from your 9-year-old daughter, you realize there are limitations to enchantments, to how much you can get away with shaking. That once you could let it all go, could carpe all the damn diem you dare, and in this chain burrito experience, in this age of graying hair, this rapture, where while gravity holds you tight to your chair, all around you, others are lifted one by one into the air. Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot you can't, there's a lot of meanings in those songs that as a parent, you start really watching the lyrics as they, you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize they said that. So,
You do. And yeah, and it's just yeah, wild to now all the songs I loved are appearing in grocery stores and Chipotle's and things like that. It's like,
well,
huh.
and in my opinion, there's no better era than the 80s. That's my jam.
Well, good. That's then you're the core audience for that book. So this is the book that came out a couple of years ago. It's called At the Corner of Fantasy in Maine, Disneyland Midlife and Churros. Poems about Disneyland Midlife and Churros, which was a weird project that I started and I didn't know why. But it's, you write poems to figure out why you're feeling the way you're feeling, and this helped me kind of figure things out. And a lot of it comes together in this poem. This is called What You Find at Disneyland Is. That when you come here on a trip by yourself and investigate why you can't stop thinking about the place and had thought maybe it was the park itself and Walt and all his stories, is that you were wrong. And you're here because of you and all the stories you've been part of on trips made here in past years to this cheerful once upon an orange grove. And it's like pulling out boxes from the basement and trying to fit into clothes from different ages of your life. And you can't, with them small or faded or so brittle they splinter apart like straw or just out of fashion because you can't be 4 or 25 or 46 ever again. You have to walk with one stiff elbow, the toe and heels that hurt, all these small pains that now take ages to soothe. You can't change any of this except maybe that gut. But man, you've come to exactly the wrong place for that when there are churro carts, peanut butter dipped in chocolate, 1,000 sweet things shaped like Mickey Mouse's head. There is a legendary sandwich you find to be ham and cheese wedged inside of something more funnel cake than bread. You came here to ride Space Mountain and find answers, but the answers aren't on roller coasters. They're in the rhythm of your body's aches as you hike up Disneyland Drive, thinking about trips with your daughters, wife, parents, friends you find yourself walking without, here in the middle of your life, halfway to the next. Don't you dare waste a breath.
So you have been to Disneyland?
I have, yeah. I was there. It was one of the first places I remember going with my parents when I was a very little kid.
Hmm.
When I was in college, I was about 5 hours away, so I went once or twice with friends. And then after my mom passed away, the first trip we took was taking my wife and my two daughters to Disneyland for the first time. So all those kind of different hubs, parts of my life kind of connected in a hub. And, when it came to, turning like 49, suddenly I started thinking about Disneyland, didn't know why. And it's really just the connection of these parts of my life, especially with my parents. And it ended up being a really fun book project that at first I started, it's like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'll write poems about Space Mountain and stuff. And
Hmm.
then as I kept writing, it got deeper and deeper into what was really, going on emotionally. And, I'm really proud of the book. So.
So when you start writing out something like a poem, it sounds like you don't really know how it's going to end. You just kind of go with the flow.
Yeah. I think I usually start with an idea or an image. I've got a deadline, a weekly deadline to start at least one new poem. So sometimes I'm right up at the deadline looking at, just a scrap of notes of possible poems. And, I'll just choose two things from the list, see if I
Mhm.
can find a connection and go from there and see what happens. I love the quote by Robert Frost, no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader, which I think really is an encouragement to be open to seeing where a poem goes rather than trying to force it. I think the part of my brain that, works in everyday life is not as smart as the part of my brain that can take over in creative tasks. I think that's the part of the brain that handles things like dreams and imagination much more. And it's fun to follow that and see what happens. Doesn't always work, but it usually works better than just, you know, a planned out kind of poem for me at least.
So do you belong to any kind of critique groups or any kind of writers groups? I know you lead a lot of conferences, but are you a member of any particular group yourself, kind of like a mentorship or just a peer group?
No, I'm not. I wish I was. I think it's been difficult with my schedule is so erratic. It's tough to commit to, something regular. But I do get a lot out of. I lead a couple writing groups a week, as well as go into schools and libraries and do a lot with that. So it at least keeps my brain working in that way. But I would love to have more help with my own writing. So,
Well, so when you end your tenureship as poet laureate, how will that change your schedule? Because you're a very busy person now. Will it increase in busyness, or what will happen, do you think?
That's a good question, and I don't know. I won't know till it really happens. I know my term ends at the end of December, and I'm scheduling things for the spring and the summer. So we'll see how long I can keep doing it this way because this is how I make my living, just as a writer and a speaker, and with always looking for things to do with poetry, and so we'll see how long I can keep going. But yeah, my hope is that there will be another state poet in Nebraska and they'll be doing great work and I'll still be doing the work I've been doing. So
Well, are you currently working on any new projects with your writing?
yeah, I've got way too many projects right now. I think the main project is a book of poems that's kind of centers on Nebraska highways
Mhm.
um, and travel around Nebraska. So that's one that I hope to get finished in the next year. But then I've got a lot of other projects. I've got folders full of poems that just need editing and organizing into a collection. I've got yeah, way too many. Another family book, another I could put together another Disneyland book just because so many poems have come
Mhm.
after the last one. A lot of them centered in Kansas City, where Walt spent several years, and just exploring that. There's so much to write about. I've got political and pandemic poems, and yeah, I've got way too many possible collections, which I think is slowing me down because it's hard to put all the time into one because suddenly the other one looks more impressive. So
So you just kind of go, you bounce from one to one to one, like
yes.
like
Yep.
Tigger. Boom, 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 boom.
Yeah,
Um,
pretty
you
much.
could write
Yeah,
a book about Tigger. That would be so cool.
it
Um,
could happen.
it
You
could.
never
You never
know.
know. Well, Matt, tell us about your website and how we can find your work.
You can find my work through midverse.com. That's my website. It also has through there you can link to I've got a Patreon account where there's free memberships, or you can help me keep going in my living as a poet. But there are monthly videos that I put up on there, and otherwise I include for all tiers, where my next readings are and different details like that. Otherwise, watch for me around. I've got a new poem coming out in Rattle sometime in the next. I never know with them. I think in the next 6 months. And different
Oh,
poems coming out in different magazines. So,
be and
uh,
rattle. That is like the number one thing right now is to be included in rattle. So congratulations.
thank you.
I only
Well,
know
yeah,
one
it's
other
tough.
person that's been actually premiered in rattle, so that's really
Well, they're tough because I'd been sending them poems for literally 20 years, batches of poems, rejected every single time. And then finally I sent them a poem about not getting published in Rattle, and it got published last year.
cool.
So
Wow. That's what
that's
we
what
all
they're
need to
looking
do.
for.
Okay, so everyone out there who watches, and I know you, write a poem about not being included in rattle. If Matt says you can get in. Just kidding.
It worked for me. I mean,
That's cool. Well, Matt, thank you so much for spending time with us today at Briar House Writes. I really do wish you the very best in your writing future.
Hey, thank you so much. It's been fun to be here in conversation with you. I appreciate it.